and welcome to This Life of Mine, the show where our guests pick the places, people, possessions, music and memories that have made them who they are. Now, if your image of a uber-successful entrepreneur resembles Succession's Logan Roy, well, my guest today could not be any further from that. His unconventional approach caught the business world, the entire business world, off guard. A high school dropout who went on to build an empire that has included, amongst many other things, a record label, an airline, hotels, gyms, a bank, radio station, and I'm pretty sure I'm right in saying he's our only guest so far on the show who's ever been to space. Now, as well as creating some of the world's biggest brands, he himself is a brand. His thrill-seeking exploits have seen him enter the record books and at times brought him face to face with his own mortality. If I'm honest, stories like his are the very reason why we wanted to create this show. So to quote one of his most famous phrases, screw it, let's do it. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Then take us away.
I'm Richard Branson and welcome to This Life of Mine.
I'm so happy you're here.
I'm very happy to be here too.
Doing this show, the sort of past sort of 40 weeks or whatever, I've realised there's two types of people. There's people who enjoy looking back at their lives, and then there's those who don't. And you always strike me as someone who looks back at his life and enjoys your achievements. Would that be fair?
Yeah, I suppose when I was a young man, I actually often thought, well, I mean, this is going to be a story worth telling the grandkids one day. And I've had a lot of stories to be able to tell the grandkids. And now I actually have grandkids to sit on my laps and tell them stories. And they don't say, Papa, we've heard that before. They humour me. So it's worked out really well.
I mean, I'm sure there's no such thing as an ordinary day. Can you give me a sense of what would be the most normal day in your life, from when you wake up to when you go to bed?
So I'm lucky enough to live on a tiny little island, and I love to get up really early, see the sunrise. I will foolishly jump in an ice bath just to wake myself up. Then I'll go and play a good hard game of tennis with the tennis pro. And then we always have interesting people on Necker visiting. So I'll go and meet up for breakfast and start the day. And then I might sneak off and do a bit of, saving the world, do some work. And then maybe go kiting, which is something which I absolutely love if the wind is up. So maybe kite around the island and then go and do a bit more work. And
I'll be honest, I was expecting more work. I wasn't expecting quite so much tennis, kiting.
No, look, I'm a great believer in trying to find about 3 hours a day of fun things where you keep active. And
has that always been the case, or is that something that came once you had kind of sold various businesses and things like that?
So about 25 years ago, I went on something my kids set up called the Strive Challenge, which is an extreme challenge. And the first one they did was actually a month long. So it was 2,000 kilometre bike ride, climbing Mont Blanc at the end of it. And I started having to get up an hour before everybody else in order to make sure I was back within an hour of everybody else, because everybody was in their 20s. But by the end of it, I was in the sort of top 10, 15%. And I remember saying to myself, I want to always feel as fit as I did at the end of the Strive Challenge. And so every year we do a Strive Challenge. And
what do you do on a Strive Challenge?
It's biking, hiking, swimming,
like a sort of
climbing.
Ironman kind of thing.
Yeah, but with a group of really interesting people, and we raise money for a really good cause, trying to reimagine education.
You've had a fascinating life by anybody's metric. For us today on the show, it was thinking, well, where do we start and where do we finish? There's so much to talk about. So on the show, we've asked you to pick a person, a possession, a place, a memory, a piece of music. We're going to start with your piece of music. Tell us the song or piece of music you've chosen today.
Do You Really Want to Hurt Me?
Do you really want to hurt me? Do you really want to make me cry?
So many years ago, we had a record company, and it became sort of the main independent record company in the world, Virgin Records. And I remember going to the 100 Club, and there was this young man on stage who looked unbelievable, who sang unbelievably, who'd written these beautiful songs, and that turned out to be Boy George.
Do you really want to?
And the band was Culture Club, right?
And the band was Culture Club.
Do you really want to make me cry?
So we signed them, and we all got together and decided to put out this single. And George stormed out. He did not think that this was the right record for us to put out.
Really?
Anyway, it took us a while to persuade him. We finally put it out. It went to number one, and it just propelled him into stardom. And from there, we went on to Karma Chameleon and other records. And George is still a friend many, many, many years later. I've just been on 4 different Virgin Voyages cruise ships with him every night, travelling to a different one. So it was like us being on tour again together.
Wow.
And he's went through a lot. I mean, when he first signed to us, he was as pure as you can imagine. And he used to do interviews against taking drugs and drink. And then he slipped up big time. And I remember taking him off to a cottage that we had in Oxford and finding a wonderful woman called Meg who helped people get off heroin. And it was all going well. And then somehow the press discovered he was there, and they started camping out and crawled across the fields to the cottage crawled in this long grass through the fields. And Meg, who was only about 4 foot tall, she walked beside us to get away from the press and get him to a churchyard, and off we went to another destination. But anyway, he managed to get himself clean, and he's just turned into the most lovely lad and done himself proud. He's absolutely delightful.
Incredible that you were that involved in his sobriety. There's being hands-on, and then there's, I got to take this guy out to a cottage. You must have had an incredible connection.
I was young myself, so I was in my early 30s, so we weren't that much older than each other. I'd left school when I was 15, and one of the things I'd left school for was to campaign against the Vietnamese War and start a magazine campaigning against the war. And in the process, because the magazine was aimed at young people, we would have thousands, literally, of people coming to us with drug problems, with people who were gay, wanted to meet other gay people, people who were pregnant who needed help, people who needed psychiatric help, suicidal people. And so it was an incredible education from the age of about 16 onwards, really. So when our artists ran into trouble, I knew who to turn to.
It's interesting when you talk about, we had a record company and we saw this band and we signed them. I think that gives illusions in people's minds of something already on day one being an extraordinary success. Was there a sense of other people, which I think is probably how lots of your companies start, with lots of other people going, that's not going to work?
Yeah. Particularly when we started the airline, but anyway. A young 15-year-old boy brought a tape along, and it was just instrumental music, and I was only 17 or 18 at the time, and I took it to a whole lot of different record companies, and none of them wanted to release it. And so I just thought, screw it, let's do it. If they won't release it, let's try to start a record company. So we literally borrowed. The only artist I knew was Sandy Denny from Fairport Conventions. I borrowed her recording contract. We crossed out her name and wrote Mike Oldfield. And we signed our first artist. And then, over the next month or two, we had to learn how to run a record company. And that's how Mike Oldfield's Tubular Bells got born. John Peel, who was the most wonderful DJ at the time, I had him to my houseboat and played him the whole record, and he just sat there absolutely mesmerized and said, look, Richard, I'm going to do something I've never done before. I'm going to play the whole album. The whole of my show is just going to be Tubular Bells. That really got the album to take off and knocked Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd from the number one spot, and that really helped us get our record company established.
Where do you think this extraordinary confidence comes from like you said, you're starting a record company, you don't know how to do it. We're going to talk about the airline in a moment, but also something that you didn't really have any particular real knowledge of how to do this or what you were doing. Where does that ingrained confidence come from that just says, well, let's go for it anyway?
It's a good question. I think because I was so young, I had nothing to lose. It wasn't as if I had a mortgage or a wife or a kid. So in a sense, there was nothing to lose. My mum was always trying things. She wasn't necessarily successful at them, but she was always trying things. So that most likely rubbed off on me a bit. She always made us, get out there and do things rather than watching other people do things. So that was the way we were brought up. But I think, having learnt to run the student magazine and then the student advisory centre, I learnt very early on that, company is all about people. If you can find the right people and give them a lot of freedom to make mistakes and as well as make good things, you've got the makings of a company. So I think I was good at finding good people and not second guessing them all the time.
You mentioned your mum there. There's a story I read about your mum, and tell me if this is true, because I do think this actually sums up a lot of what we're talking about in you, which is you are, I think, around 4 or 5 and you're driving home in the car. Your mum pulls the car over, opens the door and says, walk home from here and get yourself home.
Yeah, I was going to my grandmother's house in Devon, and we were in the countryside in one of these Devon lanes, and I must have been playing up or something in the back of the car, and she just stopped the car and said, out you go, you can make your own way home, which was about 3 miles away. And it was my grandmother's house, which I don't actually go to very often, and I ended up walking across the fields. It was getting a bit late, ending up in one of the neighbouring farmers' houses, and my poor mother by then was obviously in complete panic. But
see, in my head, this was some extraordinary piece of parenting where you got out and you found your own way and it all worked out.
Well, I survived, and I think she would do things that today I suspect parents would get arrested for. So she would, put us on a bike and, aged 8 or 9, and tell us to ride a couple of 100 miles in the pouring rain somewhere, and she very much believed that you had to stand on your own 2 feet. And I think if you survived it, that was good.
Let's move on to your memory. Tell us the memory that you've chosen as being significant in your life.
I'll choose my wedding. Joan and I, next year is our 50th year together. We've been extraordinarily lucky. It was very much love at first sight. She was in a recording studio. I walked in and it was like a lightning bolt. And then I knew a friend of hers. And so if she was going out, I got the nickname Tag Along. Could I tag along with you? And slowly wore her down. But anyway, in the end, many years later, we'd had 2 children first. We decided to get married on Necker Island, and I wanted to impress the kids. So there was an advert for Milk Tray, and so I put this box of Milk Tray in my mouth. I clung onto the under strut of a helicopter, and it took off. And
oh my God.
I flew to the great house, and the helicopter dumped us in what was meant to be the deep end, but they ended up dumping me into the shallow end. And so I limped into the wedding, a bit bedraggled, and much to the amusement of my kids. With I think the box of Milk Tray had fallen out of my mouth by then. Anyway, we had a wonderful day, and it's lovely having your kids at the wedding.
See, even that story on your wedding day, there you are, box of chocolates in your mouth, hanging off a helicopter. Do you enjoy being unconventional and surprising people? Is that the thing that you really get the biggest kick from?
I would hate to be invited to do something completely and utterly out of the ordinary and have said no and then have to watch it happening on television with somebody else doing it. So if something hasn't been achieved before, like being the fastest across the Atlantic in a boat, or flying the Atlantic in a hot air balloon, or flying around the world in a hot air balloon, or going to space or whatever, I'm going to leap in and say, yeah, I'd love to have the experience. And I'm just so lucky to have these ridiculously unbelievable opportunities in my lifetime. And I'm also even more lucky to be able to have come back to tell the tale about them.
Let's move on to your place. Tell us the place that you've chosen to talk about on the show today.
The Casbah Tamadot in Morocco. So I was trying to fly around the world in a hot air balloon, as you do. And the jet stream goes right across the top of Marrakesh. You can get winds of 250 miles an hour across the top of Marrakesh. So we decided that the best place to launch the balloon would be in Marrakesh, in the middle of Marrakesh, under the jet stream. And then the idea was to climb into the jet stream. And the jet stream, like a river, the idea would be that it would take us around the world. So whilst waiting for the right conditions on ground to erect the balloon, my parents went up into the mountains and they banged on this wonderful big door of this place called the Casbah Tamadot, and they were let in and had a cup of coffee and then came back to me and said, "You've got to come up and see this place. It's just magnificent." And the next day I went up to see the Casbah Tamadot. You had Mount Toubkal to one end. You had two rivers flowing either side. The Berber community were running the place, and we all fell in love with it and decided to turn it into a little boutique hotel. And I've become very attached to, we've got about 150 Berber people working there. It's all 100% Moroccan run. And it's just a very special place. It was hit by an earthquake a year ago, and we just reopened it. And the communities are all getting back on their feet. They've been incredibly stoic and brave. They lost a lot of people in the villages, but it's a very, very, very beautiful place, and I'd love to escape there. We did then take off in that balloon, and we skirted Iraq and ended up being sucked down the Himalaya chain over Mount Everest, over K2. And then the Chinese told us if we came out through the far end of the Himalayas, they would shoot us down.
Hang on, this message comes through your
it comes by
radio?
Yeah, fax. Yeah. It was fax machines.
Hang on, they fax you in the balloon?
In the balloon, yeah.
You've got a fax machine in the balloon, and a fax comes through from China saying, if you come near us, we will shoot you down.
Yeah. One side note about the fax machine is when we took off, we realised we'd forgotten to bring the loo paper. So the fax machine was very important anyway. So
Wow. Wow.
But looking at the Himalayas was gorgeous. But knowing that when we came out the other end of the Himalayas, we obviously couldn't land a balloon in the Himalayas. So we had about 20 hours of having to contact Downing Street and try to get through to Tony Blair. And
Is this all happening on fax?
This is all happening on fax, sort of, and then begging them to let us through. And finally, just before we got to China, they said, well, get out of our airspace quickly.
What is the reason for wanting to do it? Because you're about to do the space flight thing as well, right? Tell me about that.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And that maybe we need a psychiatrist to sit here and
But you must
analyse
have thought
it.
about it. You must have thought,
No.
what is my want? Well, firstly, let me ask this. Why a balloon?
So when we did the Atlantic crossing, which was the first challenge, nobody had flown successfully across the Atlantic before. We had one second-hand 747 in our airline. We had no advertising budget to advertise it. And we had just been the fastest across the Atlantic in a boat, having sunk the year before, and put Virgin Atlantic on the map in Britain because the Virgin brand wasn't that well known at the time. The boating had very much made our brand almost like as big as British Airways in people's minds at that time, and enabled us to, compete with British Airways. And, unlike every other airline that competed with British Airways, 40 years on, was still here today. But I also got sucked into the whole excitement and the adventure myself personally. So having succeeded with the boat, then somebody says, no one's crossed the Atlantic in a hot air balloon. The furthest a hot air balloon has been is 600 miles. I think I can build a balloon that can go into the jet stream, which had never been done before, where the winds are really strong, and we'll end up crossing the Atlantic. My excuse was the publicity, but actually I just loved the idea of the challenge of doing something that hadn't ever been achieved before. and pretty well everything that could go wrong went wrong. But we managed to keep Virgin in the headlines and I suppose propel Virgin forward into lots of different areas in the years to come.
I mean, but you're still doing this because you were recently confirmed as one of 3 co-pilots on the world's first commercial stratospheric balloon flight. Why is that something that you wanted to do?
Because I think it'll be magnificent. I suspect the most magnificent day of my sort of non-personal life was going to space. I mean, that was just an extraordinary day.
Can you try and describe it for me?
Every moment of the day was breathtaking. I mean, from waking up in the morning to finding Elon in my kitchen at 3:30 in the morning with his baby. He come to surprise me and to send us off, to heading to the spaceport with Holly and Sam and Joan. I mean, the actual trip up there into space, we went from 0 to 3,000 miles an hour in 7 to 8 seconds. It was, just an extraordinary feeling. We'd spent 20 years building this spaceship, so we literally had built it from scratch. So to be going up on our own spaceship, launched from our own mothership, was a pinch me moment. And then the roar of the engines, and then when you're in space, the complete silence of space and unbuckling and then just floating up into the air. And we had a bunch of young people up there with me, and we had just the biggest smiles on our faces, and then looking back down on our gorgeous planet. And yeah, so that was definitely a culmination of lots of incredible moments over the lifetime.
Let's move on to your person. I'm excited to hear about this. Tell us the person that you've chosen to want to talk about on the show today.
Nelson Mandela. Where to start? So we'd managed to get some hostages out of Iraq. We contacted Saddam Hussein through the King of Jordan, who I knew, and he agreed to release some hostages that he was holding in return for us flying in with some much needed drugs for the Iraqi people. And I met Saddam Hussein at the airport in Baghdad. A few months later, the Second Iraq War was building up, and it was a war that there was no justification for. I think all of us at the time knew there were no weapons of mass destruction, despite what our governments were telling us. And so we decided to see whether we could persuade Saddam Hussein to step down from being leader of Iraq in order to avoid Americans and Britain invading Iraq. So I contacted the King of Jordan again. We wrote Saddam a letter which basically said, if this war goes ahead, it's like you're going to lose your life, your family are going to lose their lives, your country will be destroyed. Why don't you consider doing what Idi Amin did from Uganda, where he went and lived in Saudi Arabia for the rest of his life? Why don't you consider going and living in Libya for the rest of your life? And he contacted us back and said, I will seriously consider it if you can send me an elder of the sort of stature of Nelson Mandela to fly out with, so I can leave with my head held high. So contacted Nelson Mandela, who agreed to go, but he wanted Kofi Annan, who was Secretary General of the United Nations, to go with him. I didn't know Kofi at that time, so it took me a few days to get through to him and reason with him, and then Kofi agreed to go. We had a plane on standby in Johannesburg to take them, and very sadly, the bombing started, and Mandela and Kofi Annan were unable to make it. So what it taught me, though, was that if 2 elders can influence somebody to that extent, maybe we should set up a group of elders who could, get involved in conflicts in the world. And Mandela agreed to be the founding elder. Kofi Annan agreed to join. Archbishop Tutu, who was a wonderful friend of Mandela's and is another extraordinary man in his own right. Mary Robinson from Ireland, and President Carter. And anyway, so this group of 12 wonderful men and women got formed. They have managed to stop some conflicts. They speak out on issues like climate, nuclear proliferation. And then it was a real delight, getting to know Mandela, his humour. When he was president, he rang me up one day. I was in the bath in England, and he tells me I've got to get back on. I'd only been in South Africa the day before. I've got to get back on the plane that night and come and rescue a chain of health clubs that were going bust, and about 4,000 people were about to be out of work. So if Mandela calls, you jump on a plane and you go back to South Africa and try to rescue these health clubs, which we ended up doing.
Wow.
I had another occasion which was magical, where he wanted us to do a statue to Steve Biko, who was an incredible black activist who was killed in a white prison. And we went to see Mandela unveil the statue, and there were about 100,000 people in the streets. And I brought Peter Gabriel with me. And after Mandela had made a speech, I went on stage and took the microphone from him and then announced to the crowd that Peter was going to sing Biko to them all, which Peter didn't know I was going to do.
I was just about to say, it feels like Peter didn't know that.
And then I handed him the microphone, and we had 100,000 people in East London, which is a sort of suburbs outside Cape Town, all singing the anthem Biko. It was just hauntingly beautiful, one of Peter Gabriel's best.
We're sort of spending a lot of time naturally talking about all of the extraordinary successes that you've had in your life. Can I ask, knowing what you know now, how important has failure been in your success?
If you're going to be a true entrepreneur, not everything you do is going to be successful. So you're going to try things, and quite often you're going to fall flat in your face. I mean, we took on Coca-Cola, for instance, and Pepsi with Virgin Cola, and it was screaming out of the stores throughout Europe. We were outselling Coke and Pepsi for about 18 months, and we then got cocky, and I got a Sherman tank, and we decided to launch in America. We arrived in New York in Times Square. They had lots of cans of Coke and Pepsi, and we drove the Sherman tank over all these cans, and there was cola squirting everywhere. And we then turned the turret of the tank on the Coca-Cola sign that we'd pyrotechnicked up the day before, and there was a bang, and it looked like we'd blown it up. This was before 9/11, so you could just about get away with things like that then. And obviously Coke were not amused, and that night they got a DC-10 on the Atlanta runway, and they filled it with money and SWAT teams, and they sent it to Europe. And suddenly Virgin Cola just disappeared from all these shelves.
Oh, my word.
They got their own back. But I love trying things. And, even although Virgin Cola didn't succeed in the long run, it was part of the sexiness of building the brand. It doesn't do the brand any harm to try things and not succeed. And it taught me a lesson. I mean, it taught me that, if you say take Virgin Atlantic and Virgin Cola, you can't differentiate, say, a soft drink that much with another can of cola. Virgin Atlantic, there's something about Virgin Atlantic that is different from British Airways, and people will go out of their way to fly Virgin Atlantic. It's just that much more special. And, Virgin Atlantic, despite it having everything thrown at it by the bigger competitor, it survived, whereas a can of cola didn't, as it turned out.
Let's move on to your possession. And you've got a rather interesting answer for this. Tell us the possession that you would like to talk about on the show.
Well, my response is that and some people will go, how could he say that? But that I'm not bothered about possessions.
No, I believe you. I think you're bothered about experience.
So I'll give you an example. One night at 4 a.m., our house was hit by a hurricane bolt in Necker. And I was woken with this banging on my door from my son, and I looked over at the great house, and there were 300-foot flames, and it was pouring with rain coming out the top. I ran over there and completely stark naked because my children were in the house. Kate Winslet happened to be staying there with her children. My mother was in the house. I ran straight into a cacti on the way there, as you do, and everybody got out. We went back to a place on the hill close by just to watch the house burning. And I remember having a hand on both of Kate's kids' shoulders, and we're looking at the fire, and just saying to them, look, everybody's safe. The possessions are just not important. I was very happy living on a houseboat for years and years and years. And I mean, I know this is going to sound a bit strange. 'Cause I do live on an island, but it is quite a small island, I promise you. And we do rent it out. We do rent it out to other people, and it does pay its bills. And then we just live in one little bit of it. But anyway, but my point is that I would be just as happy living on a houseboat.
A friend of mine used to live on a houseboat that was in Bow Locks. The true story. He bought this houseboat and he had to give it a name, so he called it the Dogs, so that when his mail would arrive, when his post would arrive, it would say his name, and then it would say the Dogs Bollocks underneath, just to make him feel good.
Oh, lovely.
I mean, one thing you have talked about possessing rather than a possession is your commitment to your health and fitness, which I find incredibly admirable. You really do speak from a place of health is the truest wealth you can have. Has that always been the case in your life? Because I don't know why, I sort of think of you at some point in your life as being an incredible hellraiser. Have you ever been?
Well, all our tables on Necker are built for dancing on, so that goes back many years. So that was important. But over the last sort of 20 odd years, I enjoy life a lot, and when I disappear from this life, I would hope that it's on the tennis court or on an extreme bike ride or climbing a mountain or something, rather than a long protracted death in a bed. So anyway, I'm approaching 75. I thoroughly enjoy life, and the best way of making sure enjoying it in the way I'd like to enjoy it is to do fun things to keep fit. And so that's what I will continue to do.
Richard Branson, your music is Do You Really Want to Hurt Me by Culture Club. Your memory is Your Wedding Day. Your place is Casbah Tamadot in Morocco. Your person is Nelson Mandela. And your possession is nothing but your health. Thank you very, very much for sharing this life of yours. What a treat.
Cheers.
Up next is this.
I'm Barry Keoghan. Welcome to This Life of Mine. We were in foster care from 5 or 6, me and my younger brother. My mum was addicted to drugs and heroin, so she couldn't look after us, but she wouldn't tell my granny because she was sort of ashamed and embarrassed. I had a lot of problems with trust. Never trusted love. And then having a child myself, like, what do I show my child? Usually people have something to draw from, some sort of experience from their father.
Sure.
But I had none. Now, I'm in LA and I'm like taking Stella Adler beginning acting classes.
Are you?
Yeah, I done that.
Are you serious?
Yeah, I done that.
When did you start
I
that?
started that back in about 4 or 5 months ago.
Hang on. Right,
Yeah.
so you walk in there as a BAFTA award winner,
Yeah.
Academy Award nominee.
They're like, mate, what are you doing here? I was like, I don't know. And then they asked me to get up on stage in class, and I was like, I'm nervous, I can't.
Right, do you want to do a quick fire round? You got to answer these in less than 3 seconds.
I
Okay.
will try.
Favorite cocktail?
A Virgin Mary,
Favorite London restaurant?
Haleppi,
Movie?
Borsalino,
Place to watch the sunset?
Necker Island,
Guest you've had on Necker Island?
Princess Diana.
Best advice anyone's ever given you?
Always look to the best in other people.
Artist you wish you had signed to Virgin Records?
The Beatles. Playfulness.
There you go. That's great.
You know, for your own children, it's occupying the place that it occupied for you in
Yes.
their minds. It's where they're learning to swim and drive boats and fish and be in nature in safety and in a place where their envelope can increase and where your envelope increase.
And a sense of continuity.
Yes,
To
and-
return back to somewhere
Yes.
every year becomes incredibly important, I think, for families.
There is this feeling of being able to breathe a little more when you're in a place that you know, my mother's not alive anymore, and this was her spiritual center. Having kids and having her not be around, it connects it all. It weaves it all together, and there's some sense of the presence of different layers of your life being in the same place at the same time.
What was your family environment like when you were growing up?
You know, we were incredibly fortunate in having what I would say a very strong family unit and extended family. My family was very bohemian. They really didn't hew to the normal motivations and drivers that so many people are defining their lives around. There was very little aspiration toward money from my grandparents to my parents, whatever. There was a lot of aspiration toward contribution. Everyone in my family were arts aficionados. They were really passionate about the arts. You know, my dad is a career conservation and environmental litigator and advocate and organization builder, and my mother's an educator, and my grandfather was very famous and very focused on affordable housing and things like that. And what I really remember was really passionate conversations amongst the adults about the world. They were very, very switched on taking on the hard things and helping figure them out. I do think it put in me and my brother and sister a sense that the work you're doing should never be a means to an ends.
Right.
It should be the ends itself.
Was there ever a moment where you were like, this is when I want to act? What was that moment?
It's funny, I don't think I knew that for sure until I was in my early 20s, but it's not to say I didn't love it. It was one among many things I did. I dreamed of being a professional baseball player. I dreamed of being a mountain climber. I wanted to be a Carl Sagan. I really had a real sense of drive toward astronomy and physics. And I wasn't defined by a drive to, certainly to act, but even to make movies or do anything like that, even though I loved it.
When were you like, this is it, I'm going to act?
I had different moments of, in high school, I got really self-conscious about the idea of performing in front of other kids in school. I felt exposed. I felt, I kind of felt like on my own and always a little anxious in school. I didn't have a very positive school experience. But then I had a teacher who, for whatever reason, took a group of us to see Ian McKellen when he was doing a tour that was called Acting Shakespeare. It was so brilliant. And I was 16, and I remember very specifically being on the school bus going home, sitting apart from my friends and feeling sort of rocked by it, almost with this buzzy feeling of that's something you could really do. Like that's a thing that you could do and access a wider life through it and have kind of a secret key into other experiences. And that started to really hold a space in my head.
Well, it became acting. And let's talk about your film debut. Let's talk about Primal Fear. Aaron Stampler, you're playing this 19-year-old altar boy accused of murdering a Catholic archbishop. It's you, Richard Gere, Laura Linney. Did you know at the time how coveted the role was, I guess? Because hearing other people talk about this part being around Los Angeles, I've heard like Matt Damon and Ben Affleck talk about it and sort of going, they knew whoever got this part, that they were set. Did you know that when you auditioned or got it?
But also I wasn't in LA. I was in New York and I was kicking around doing downtown theater. I'd had some experiences in the theater that were really, really high quality. I was way, way, way out in the outer edges of the solar system. When it came to sort of films, no, I did not have a strong sense of awareness of it. And when I got the role, that was obviously super exciting.
Well, my. You sure fucked this one up, counselor. It sounds to me like they're gonna shoot old Aaron so full of poison it's gonna come out his eyes.
Where is Aaron?
Aaron's crying off in some corner somewhere. You scared him off. You gotta deal with me now, boy. I'll give you a beating on principle. Look at me. You ever come in here and pull any of that tough guy shit on Aaron again, I will kick your fucking ass to Sunday. Do you understand me?
I understand you.
It did feel like overnight you just became talked about in this extraordinary way. You win a Golden Globe, nominated for an Oscar. How comfortable were you with the attention that came your way seemingly overnight? You don't strike me as someone who's gone, well, I think I want to be famous.
I can't credit myself with being that cool. I wasn't Bob Dylan as a 20-year-old.
Sure.
you know, anyone who aspires to be an actor who's not holding fantasies of their life as a famous actor is lying.
Yes,
you know what I mean?
agree with you.
You know,
Yes.
that like I was working with Milos Forman on The People versus Larry Flint when Primal Fear came out. You know, he lost both of his parents to the Nazis in the war. He grew up as an orphan. He came up under the Soviet system. He was a real mentor to me. He let me sit in the editing room with him. He talked a lot about his process. He's, I think, one of the only people who won Best Director twice. He made Amadeus. He made One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. You know, he was a giant to a lot of us. And he wasn't cynical at all. He had a real laid back kind of sense of equilibrium about it all. And that was very helpful to me. And also really conveyed to me, this is wonderful. You know, he used to say, I'm happy for you. Just keep leaning into the work itself. That's really what's going to put solidity under you, you know?
Well, this brings us very beautifully to your memory.
Oh, yeah.
Tell us about the memory that you've chosen as particularly significant.
The memory I chose was showing The People versus Larry Flint to Václav Havel, who was the president of the Czech Republic at the time.
When I came up with the idea for this show, and I said to people, I would love to hear people's favourite memories. I think it will be very humanising. Never in a million years did I think that someone would pick screening a movie to a former president of Czechoslovakia, and I thank you for that. I really do.
For context, Václav Havel, he was an authentic anti-establishment artist, a playwright who led a peaceful revolution. But one of the things I found out from Milos Forman was that he and Václav Havel had gone to an academy together as boys and come up as friends in university, in the Czech theater, and in Czech independent film. And he had kind of a superstition, which was that before he released a film, he always wanted to show it to Havel.
Right.
You know, he said to me, you know, can you come to Prague? I said, sure. You know, why? He said, well, you have to show the film to Havel. And I was like, I remember, you know, again, I'm 26 or 27 at the time. And so we show the film at the New York Film Festival. It gets a huge ovation. They whisk us in cars to Larry Flint's jet. And we fly with Larry Flint and the gang on that film to Prague, where Milos...
With a print of the film?
Yeah, with a
right.
print of the film.
Wow.
And Václav Havel was president. He's in, you know, the castle of
Sure.
Prague. We're walking around in Prague with Milos, is like being with Mick Jagger. People are spotting him. Oh, Forman, you know.
Yeah.
And we go up to the castle. We show the film. Afterwards, he said something like, tonight I'm a playwright. I'm going out drinking with my friends.
Oh, wow.
He let his security detail go, and he just walked down into the old town below the castle. And we get to this bar, and I hear Milos, he sees someone sitting at the bar, and he goes, Misha! And it turns around, and it's Mikhail Baryshnikov, the great Russian ballet dancer and actor. And he and Havel and Milos start talking. They're friends because they both defected together in the same time. And he's there because he's dancing his first concert since 1968, before he defected, when he was there with the Russian ballet. And Václav Havel's wife has died. And so Baryshnikov is doing this thing called the Concert for Olga in tribute to her. And he gives us tickets. I feel like I've taken MDMA or something. I'm in this out of body state. We go to the Prague Opera House. As we're going, Woody Harrelson and his wife Laura have just had a new baby. And we're in the cars and we're walking into the building, and I realize that Laura has got the baby in a sling and that they're going in. And I remember thinking to myself, oh, I guess she's going to wait back, you know,
Sure.
while we go to see the show and everything. We're flowing into the theater, and they've got us in the first row of the first mezzanine facing the stage, which is about 20 seats in from the aisle on either side. And I turn to Woody and say, Wood, the baby can't be in the theater for this. And he goes, she'll be all right. And I was like, Woody, do you understand the layers of what's going on here? Like, you can't have a baby in the theater. And he's like, I love you, man. You're so intense. He's like, I love it. He goes, if she gets all, if she fusses, he goes, Laura will give her the breast. He goes, I love you. Come here. You know, and I'm really starting to panic. A light comes up on the empty stage, and Baryshnikov comes out on stage for the first time since 1968 in ballet tights, no shirt, barefoot, and the place goes, bananas. The first piece that he's dancing is a piece without music. The whole place goes into this level of silence that you've never heard. And he bends himself into this kind of like prayerful kind of head down pose. And the baby just unleashes.
Oh my God.
Right? Woody's baby screams in that silence. The level of rage that turned on us at that moment was Woody starts screaming, "Give her the breast, give her the breast, give her the breast." And Laura's trying to clamp the baby on, and the baby's having none of it.
Dear.
And I go, "Get her out, get her out, get her out, get her out." And Woody goes, "Take her away, take her away." He starts screaming like he's having a full Sophie's Choice. He's like, "Take the baby, take the baby." Laura leaps up and he's going, excuse me, pardon me, excuse me, pardon me, excuse me, because we're 25 people from the aisle while everyone waits.
Yeah.
Baryshnikov is looking up into the balcony and waiting. Finally, Laura disappears with the sound of the baby descending the stairs of the Prague Opera House. Woody, do you remember those Bugs Bunny cartoons where Bugs Bunny would melt?
Yes.
Woody has melted down into a puddle on the floor. I've made myself the smallest I've ever been in the chair. And he proceeds onward with the concert. And he was really gracious. He came out, he took the baby and all these things. But
this story's so quirky. I'm amazed it isn't a Wes Anderson movie.
It was, the whole thing was so memorable and strange. It's like a dream that you remember that you had, but it did really happen.
It's a glorious memory. Let's move to your person. Tell us who the person is that you have chosen for us today.
I chose Dr. Paul Farmer. Paul was a really good friend of mine. Even when I wouldn't see him for a long time, he was one of those people that occupied a place in your head because you felt under the gaze of his assessment of what you were doing with your life, whether you were with him or not.
Right.
He was a doctor. He founded this incredible organization called Partners in Health. There was a book about him called Mountains Beyond Mountains, which I can't recommend highly enough. It's by Tracy Kidder, and it won the Pulitzer Prize. It's just a profile of him, but it's really about a person who has dedicated their own life to serving other people. Except unlike a Mother Teresa and kind of a saintly figure, Paul is irreverent and hilarious and self-deprecating and very toothy and clever in his criticism of the rationales and convenient accounting that people will use to justify inequity. He makes you feel your own accounting of what you're doing in your own life. You feel a little insufficient, right?
Yeah.
Not in the sense of feeling guilt, but in the sense of realizing that whatever else you're doing, you ought to be more engaged with uplifting others. I was lucky and met him and became friends and became an advocate for his work.
Would you say he changed the way or the outlook on how you spend your time?
Yes.
Right.
He had a maxim that I really liked. He said, I'm going to paraphrase it, but basically he said that working on hard things with friends is the dream. It's funny, going back to what we were talking about earlier, there was a time in my life I saw performing, acting, and telling stories as the gateway to a wider life. I think the reason I picked Paul is Paul had a big effect on, I would say, my last 10 or 15 years in the sense that he sort of changed my sense of what's the doorway through which I'm going to find a wider life, a richer life. I mean, he passed away much too young. And I remember feeling this real sense of sadness, and it's a very tragic loss for the world. It was a tragic loss for people who were really close to him, his colleagues. But even people like me who were in that next order of remove, I hadn't seen him in a couple years. He was a North Star, I think. And for me, he was a standard bearer in the sense that even in private conversation, he would sort of say things like, life is a tapestry. It's not a career path. If you don't project yourself forward and imagine yourself lucky enough to have gotten to 80, looking back, you can end up like going, I had all this time and I did one thing.
Yeah.
My actor brain, actors are not unpossessed of ego, and that voice will scream in my head, like, why aren't you working more?
Sure.
But I know better in some sense. I think I know that I don't only want to play dress up.
Sure.
I'd rather be a pilot than play a pilot, that you want to be able to have fresh adventures.
See, I think I'd rather play a pilot. We're talking about some really interesting themes, and it brings us really quite nicely to your possession. Tell us the possession that you've chosen as significant in your life.
I have a surfboard that belonged to Greg Knoll. Outside surfing, very few people would know who he is, but he's a giant figure in the world of surfers and surfing history. One of the original North Shore big wave surfers. And he famously made these fantastic boards.
What does it look like? Tell me what it looks like.
I think surfboards really are a kind of art. Like they are a beautiful thing. They are both beautiful sculptural things with incredible graphic designs on them. And then they're also this actual instrument of connecting yourself to kinetic force and movement and balance and light and
beautiful.
All these things. And so I love surfing, but I actually really love looking at them. And this one's very strange within the surfboard design. It almost looks like a Mondrian. It's got very rectilinear lines on it. And I have it in a living room, and it's on a stand. It's not functional really anymore. But it stands for something also that in my life at this point, I realize I want as much of as I can possibly get, which is just kind of a zen.
He stood for a sort of freedom of essentially choosing your bliss over your career, in a sense. But if your career is your bliss, then choose that. It's just make that the thing, right?
Definitely. And Greg Knoll was not, one of the things I like about him is, I'm going to connect this back to Phil Hoffman. We had one year we worked on a series of things together. And I remember we were standing around and we were talking about people like De Niro who we'd worked with and things like that. And we were talking about Harvey Keitel and De Niro, and he said, don't those guys all make you feel square? And I remember thinking, Phil Hoffman is the last person I would call a square,
for sure.
But I knew what he meant. Greg Knoll was just this kind of big linebackery looking guy with a brush cut haircut. He wasn't like a Dharma bum.
Right.
He was part of this ethos of choosing life in the present moment, and guys who really felt that sleeping in the back of their truck in the mud, eating a pineapple and a chicken that they stole out of someone's backyard while waiting for this condition to arise that they could plug themselves into and be entirely in the present moment, that there was no better way to live. They were Peter Pan and the Lost Boys, living in their youth and living in the present moment and not getting pulled into that kind of American dream, in big quotes, because to them, that wasn't the American dream. The American dream was living. I like that. I like everything that stands for when I look at it. It screams to me the kind of quality of life that you ought to really be chasing, which is experiences.
But is there a world left that you'd love to conquer? As an actor, as a director, as a writer, as a creative, what's the thing where you go, if I could manifest that to come my way, what would it be? There's
this gorgeous memoir called Barbarian Days that is a New Yorker writer. This guy I read for years in the New Yorker, William Finnegan, wrote this memoir of his life surfing, even as he became a prize-winning writer and commentator. He sustained this sort of secret life. And the book is not so much about surfing. It's a meditation on aging, really. Right. It's a meditation on the way that the 18-year-old you who's duck diving through a wave can pop up at 35 and then pop up at 70. And, you move through these waves of your life. And when you're young, you're looking forward to the person you're hoping to become. And when you're older, you're looking back and trying to hold on to a measure of that present, unencumbered person you were. And this wonderful writer and director, Steve Gagan's actually making it. We're gonna do that. And it's
That's amazing.
Yeah, exactly. And when I read it, I remember thinking this could never be a film because it's a meditation. It's a poem. It's not a narrative. But Steve has this idea of it that I think is so beautiful. We're going to do it. When you say, what are you waiting for? Yeah. I'm not waiting for a thing in particular. I wait for the thing that there's no question whatsoever I'm going to do it. None. I don't care about the result at all. I mean, I care about the result, but all I want to do is throw myself into what's entailed.
The result isn't the reason for doing it. Yes, yes.
And I don't have a very strong impulse to show what I can do anymore.
I get that.
What draws me to A Barbarian Days is that, number one, I'm not at all sure it will work as a film. I think it could, in the way that Terry Malick or Iñárritu's film Beautiful, I don't know if you ever saw that, masterpiece. You know, sometimes films are meditations. They're not narratives. And those are really elusive and really hard. So that's kind of tantalizing. But more than that, what it's rolling around in is exactly what I want to marinate in right now. You know, it feels true to where I am.
I'm already excited to see it. And I'm equally as excited we had to ask you for a film. I had no idea what you were going to choose. I knew it was going to be a film I'd never heard of.
Really?
I just felt it was. Because I think that's...
We have some mutual friends that we watch a lot of films with.
Yes, but I think that you enjoy introducing people to films.
I do. That's definitely true.
I think you would look at something like this going, well, I'm not going to choose...
Taxi Driver.
Yes.
Right.
Although, can you name a better film?
No, it's a definitive film for me. It's in the 5 films that made me want to be an actor.
Yeah.
But no one needs
to hear someone say, well, I'm choosing Taxi Driver. That's what I mean. So tell us the film you've chosen.
I chose a film called Border, which is a Swedish film. It's made by a Swedish filmmaker who is an Iranian immigrant to Sweden who's made brilliant stuff. But I chose it in part because it really stayed with me. It was one of those wonderful things that I saw without any context. And I can't stress enough, put it on, don't watch the trailer, don't read anything about it, just go for the ride, because it's so unexpected and beautiful and lyrical and brilliant and unnerving. All these great things. A lot of what we've been talking about is sort of, underneath what we're talking about is sort of the delta between work and craft and then all this noise that comes with it, right? And we've gotten to this place in American filmmaking where I feel like essentially now things are being put out and it's being rammed down your throat before you've even had time to digest who's in the film, that it's an awards film. And that agenda is being pressed so hard. I used to roll my eyes, and this year I actually started taking offense to something,
right?
Which is that I'm going to make these dots connect.
Go on.
There's a film out, I'm not even going to name it right now. There's a young actor in it that I've never heard of. Before even getting to see a trailer for the film, I've seen all these advertisements that are interviews with the director of the film talking about how that actor auditioned and why he selected him and why he's so brilliant, and the actor themselves talking about the process and everything. I'm done. I'm cooked.
Right.
I don't even want to see the film now.
Yeah.
Because they've ruined it for me. They've ruined it for me.
It's weird,
by
isn't it?
marketing the film, by telling me that this person should get nominated. This is not a criticism of the directors or the actors, but the degree to which the industry, they're almost marketing to a result. They have abandoned the commitment to delivering an experience that's magical.
Mm.
It's become corporate. And that's what happens when things become too corporate.
Sure.
Because you're literally atomizing the capacity for the audience to suspend disbelief and enter into the thing on its own terms. They're literally making the whole thing artificial by talking about the artifice of it and the genius of the people involved.
Yeah.
And it is so destructive.
Yeah.
It makes me not want to see the film, which is awful, right? I feel it's been essentially dismantled for me. So going back to the positive, when I watched Border and I saw it with zero context, which is how I think people should see it, without ruining it, I want to say that the 2 lead actors in this film, these actors are doing work that's so out on a limb and so bold and so knowing what you know about the process and about how many people are standing around and what it takes to do certain things with conviction, how exposed you can feel, right? I tried to imagine doing the work that they've done, and I actually felt that I might have felt too self-conscious to do
Wow.
it. That's how much I admired it.
That's a huge compliment from you.
Yeah, it is just the most fantastic work.
Well, let's move to your piece of music. Tell us the piece of music that you've chosen for us today.
I find this question unfair because
Yes, it's deeply unfair.
deeply
This
unfair.
is all unfair.
I chose the Smiths' "There Is a Light That Never Goes Out."
Take me out tonight.
Tell me why this song, because this song is, I actually think it may be the most beautiful lyrics that have ever been written.
I did actually have in my thought, I wonder what we both like. You know, no, I thought, I wonder what you would relate to. I had an experience recently of it coming on, and it threw open like this sense memory of myself in this shitty little Ford driving around, wondering where the party was that I hadn't been invited to, trying to find it by seeing the flow of cars in my town, you know, wanting to have my life get bigger.
And if a double-decker bus crashes into us, to die by your side is such a heavenly way to die.
It's a sentimental song, but it's the best kind of sentimental song. And I think that there's so much longing in that song.
Oh.
There's so much longing in that song for life to get going and for expansiveness, just for connection to someone else. It's so romantic. It's such a romantic song. It was a toss-up, that and the Talking Heads song, "This Must Be the Place."
Oh, yeah, that's a great 1 and 2.
It's a great 1 and 2 of pure kind of longing, just longing for how you want your life to have a poetry and shape up. Maybe that also is what happens at a certain point, like you almost feel like you did then again.
You just want to be 19 again because it was so hopeful. There was so much ahead of you. But then I always do this. Whenever my friends talk in terms of aging, I say, I can remember when you turned 29 and you were saying to me, oh my God, I'm so old. This is crazy. And you look back now and you're so young. And the truth is, you're going to wake up today, like I'm 45, wake up at 65 with absolutely no idea how utterly young I am right now. And I think that will be the case. And if you can remind yourself of that and search for Greg Knoll's Bliss and Dr. Paul Farmer's Outlook and Edward Norton's search to expand the good and the great and the happiness in life, then you'll wake up one day and you'll look back and go, do you know what? That was all right.
Yeah. Tapestry.
Edward Norton, your place is a lake in Ontario. Your memory was showing the former president of Czechoslovakia. The People versus Larry Flint. Your person is Dr. Paul Farmer. Your possession, a Greg Knoll surfboard. Your wildcard film is the Swedish movie Border. Your music is the Smiths' There Is a Light That Never Goes Out. Thank you for sharing this life of yours. What a life it's been and what a life it's going to be. Up next is this.
I'm Christina Applegate. Welcome to This Life of Mine. He wasn't sure of my voice. And so I'd start to sing if they could see me now. And, I'm like doing this. He goes, stop moving your fucking arms. Like Broadway screaming like that. You'll never amount to nothing. What 13-year-old comes and just wants to hang out with their mommy for 3.5 hours? Like, not many. She's my best friend. And she's the reason I get up in the morning. She's the reason I even try. Because it's really easy to close the curtains.
Yeah.
When you feel like this.
So this moon necklace, your possession.
Everyone knows. Anyone
was
who
given
sees
to
it.
you by Stevie Nicks.
By Stevie Nicks, yeah. It was just like a something happened, with our spirits. This is the new part of the circle.
Right.
I don't know how many she's given out,
Okay.
but I was one of the first. This was just recent.
Imagine how pissed off you'd be if I was wearing one.
If you were wearing the new ones, I'd be like, what? Stevie?
So we have one quick fire round. You'll answer this in 3 seconds.
Okay, great.
Within 3 seconds. TV show.
Succession.
Sandwich.
The Ollie from Court Street Grocers in New York.
Oh, okay. Sport to watch.
Right now, football, and I mean that in the universal sense of soccer.
Oh, great. Sport to play.
Tennis.
Season.
Fall.
Smell.
Cedar.
App on your phone.
My guitar tuner.
Celebrity to bump into at an award ceremony. Who's the one you see and you go, well, there, this will be fun.
I'm going to say the one that I haven't and that I aspire to, Nick Cage.
Oh, great answer. Hello and welcome to This Life of Mine, the show where we talk about the places, people, possessions, music and memories that have made our incredible guests who they are. Joining me today is a singer, songwriter, producer whose voice and musicianship has won her huge critical acclaim as well as 10 Grammy Awards. It could have been such a different story. Aged 4, her heart stopped multiple times when she was in a coma after contracting meningitis. When she finally left hospital, her family knew that she was saved for a reason. Perhaps that's why she hasn't only used her voice for singing, choosing to speak up on multiple issues, using her platform to great effect and raising millions for her Looking Out Foundation, which is why Brandy and her wife are regularly named as women who are changing the world. I'm very, very excited for this show. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Then take us away.
I'm Brandy Carlisle. Welcome to This Life of Mine.
Now, Brandy, I need to tell you something.
Mm-hmm.
We've done a few episodes of this now, and I've never, in the history of the time we've been doing this show, has anybody had such a profound effect on our team who make the show. So Jeff, who works on the show, I have never seen a man so obsessed with a guest ever. Even now, as you walked in, people are spraying cologne. People are making sure that is this a regular occurrence in your life? Is this the Carlisle effect?
No, I sprayed cologne in the car too. I was just as excited to meet everybody in here.
Imagine if you said I was just as excited to meet Jeff, and I've really got to say something.
All I've been thinking about is Jeff. I get no sleep.
Thanks so much for being here. I'm really excited to talk to you about your life. We've asked you for a person, a place, a possession, a piece of music, and a movie. And first up, we're going to talk about a memory. It plays a significant part in your life and your story. Tell us the memory that you've chosen to talk about today.
I chose to talk about an attempt that I made as a teenager to be baptized in the Baptist church that went terribly wrong.
So what happened?
I've always been pretty spiritual, even maybe religious person, and quite Jesus-y. As you mentioned, I had like a near-death experience as a child, so I had a lot of faith-based conversation and existential insinuation about my life. I was the first grandchild on both sides, and I felt very self-important, as a kid, and felt really close to the other side. I felt that the veil had been lifted, and I'd had a chance to see beyond it really young. And as I got older and started to realize I was gay, it was really frightening to me because it was just antithetical to everything that I had learned was virtuous or sort of salvation-friendly.
Yeah.
And I'd be lying if I said it didn't embarrass me and smack me in the face a few times. And this is one of those times where I was a teenager. I was going to this church. I loved this church. And my brother was in the church. And we're only about 11 months apart. We're really, really close. And we sort of did everything together. But we started to find a fork in the road around my sexuality and his faith at this time. And for whatever reason, I felt that some reconciliation to myself, some reconciliation to my brother, to my family, to my small town would be possible if I made this sort of declaration that would get me out of this feeling of isolation and outsiderness. I knew I couldn't change that I was gay. I was out of the closet in school. My hair was about 1.5 inches long. I was a total little baby dyke. And I stood up in the middle of church on Sunday and said, yeah, I'd like to be baptized.